Well, we sure do love talking with you about our ag commodity trade. I'm Marlon Bowling with you, and this morning we actually had our weekly export sales data that came out from USDA, and for a change, things were starting to look up here this week. On the corn, we had a fairly healthy number. It was over 800,000 tons that were sold last week. In fact, 857,000, and the soybeans, 672,000. Meanwhile, the wheat finally made a good showing. 544,000 tons were sold last week. Even the soy meal remained pretty strong at 358,000 tons last week. Also, we had numbers for grain sorghum and cotton and rice, and on grain sorghum sales, 58,000 tons last week. Upland cotton, 66,300 running bales, and the rice, 28,100 tons. As far as the trade goes, well, let's see if it's reacting to these numbers very much or not. On the corn, well, you be the judge. You have December 2 3/4 higher. We're at 486, so we are within a penny of our high of the day. In the soybean trade, we opened up about 9 lower. Now we're 10 3/4 lower, and November is now at 1292.5. Just seems to have bricks in its shoes here. It just can't get anywhere today. Now on the wheat in Chicago, we have December, the nearby month, just 3/4 cent higher at 580 1/4. And in Kansas City, now we had a lot of pressure there early on, came back somewhat, and now it's starting to sag a little for the second time. We're down 4 at 690.5. In Minneapolis today, in the spring wheat market, you have December up 3/4 cent at 751.5. Not doing much at all. Cotton trade in December is now 113 points higher. It's starting to gain momentum to the upside. Now we're all the way up to 89.43 per pound. That's within 17 points of our high of the day right now. We're about 100 points off of our earlier low. I'm joined by Mr. Ted Seifried of Zaner Ag Hedge in Chicago. Ted, good to have you with us here today. The markets, we're getting toward the end of the month. We're getting toward the quarterly stocks report that'll be coming out tomorrow. And I guess we will have a small grain report as well. What's going to be in that report?
You know, the main focus on this report is certainly grain stocks. This September 1st quarterly grain stocks is, in effect, our old crop ending stocks for corn and soybeans. In effect, our new crop beginning stocks for corn and soybeans. So it will have a bit of an impact. We have had a history of some misses on this report, so that could be interesting. If we do see any big surprises there, that will definitely set the tone for tomorrow and possibly for the next few weeks. If not, then we move right along back to talking about harvest, back to talking about export sales and things like that. We're obviously having a bit of a tug of war on the board today, with corn wanting to lead everything higher and soybeans wanting to lead everything lower. But as you said, you know, we finally are kind of stringing together some halfway decent corn numbers, and we know that next week is going to be really good. That sale that we saw to Mexico that was announced on Monday, that'll be included in next week's export sales report. But then on the other side of that, the soybean sales continue to sag at a time of year where you would like to see them or expect to see them at double or triple of the numbers that we've been seeing for the last few weeks. So again, you have a bit of a tug of war happening on the board here today. I'm not sure which one will win. I will say that corn is running into very key trendline resistance overhead. And if we can't get over today's high, which in effect only a 0.5 cent off of yesterday's high, well, this could be a likely area to see corn. Even though this is yesterday we posted the highest close that we saw since September 11th.
Interesting stuff. Yeah, it's kind of odd. I don't know if we're actually selling off soybeans just because the funds were so net long. Or if it's because we're at the end of the month, or maybe it's because the funds were net long at the end of the month and they're trying to take profits before the end of the month. How much of a factor do you think that would be?
Yeah, I think that's all a factor, Marlon. You know, we always have money moves happening at the end of the month. But for me, the biggest thing is, you know, for all the talk we hear about how terrible the soybean crop is, unless China steps in and starts buying fairly aggressively, it might not matter. And if China's not concerned about the soybean crop not being there, well, then I don't think the markets are going to be concerned about that. So for me, that's the main driver in soybeans right now, is sort of the lack of export sales, specifically to China. And then to your point, yes, some end of the month, end of the quarter positioning that we're seeing. I think with everything that's happening in a risk-off setting, with all the weakness that we've seen in the stock market and strength in the dollar, you're going to continue to see risk off, whether it's the end of the month or not.
And it's interesting to me that the grain markets aren't doing too much, in spite of the fact that I want to bring up the U.S. dollar index value. It's kind of taking it on the chin here. It's been riding high for several days, but it is backing up 371 points today. So we're back down under 106 on December futures at 105.995, and yet the grains can't really capitalize on that very much today. We'll come back in a moment and we'll talk more with Ted Seifried. We'll talk about livestock after this break. Now, as we change our focus over to livestock this morning, let's see how they're faring. Of course, it's been a rough week here on the cattle market. Today on live cattle, we have turned things around. So we are higher now across the board. You have December now 95 cents higher, and it's up there at 189.12, gaining back quite a bit of ground today. The February contract is now up $1.10 at 193.50. All the deferreds from February on out are at least $1 higher right now. On the feeder cattle market, you have October up $1.17 at 253.42, but they have a long way to go to gain back what they lost this week. We're about 40 cents from our high of the day there. On the lean hog market, you currently have the October up $1.20 at 83.32. They're starting to flex their muscle. And December leading the way, $2 higher. December lean hogs at 74.82. Now make it 2.05 higher as they continue to push upward here on the day. We had the beef and the pork export numbers out this morning, Ted, and they were actually pretty good, for a change. And I saw where China was a buyer on both the beef and the pork, Ted, but not in an overly big way. So is that a win or a loss?
These are some pretty typical numbers of what we had been seeing, maybe a little bit better, maybe a little bit on the higher end. So that's not a terrible thing. I think we're going to call that a small win. But, you ended the last segment talking about the U.S. dollar. And yes, I think this is where we're seeing that lower dollar really come to fruition in as far as markets are concerned. I think that is helping the cattle and the hogs, and live cattle bouncing off of some pretty key support. But going back to that dollar just for a second, yesterday, or actually even earlier today, we put in the highest high that we've seen since November of 2022. The dollar has been an absolute tear since mid-June. We are due for a bit of a correction or a little bit of a cooling off, but that strength that we've seen in the dollar has been sort of this underlying concern that we've had commodity-wide, except for maybe crude oil, which has a completely different set of fundamentals. But the dollar has been a concern and will continue to be a concern unless this is an actual top. But I got to say, I don't really think so. This is just correcting a very overbought market, in my opinion.
Crude oil is down $1.08 right now at $92.60 per barrel on the West Texas Intermediate crude. But as you pointed out, Ted, it has been quite a run on the crude oil trade. Just a solid angle upward there, I'd say about a 40-degree angle with an upward trajectory. Great stuff, Ted. Thanks for analyzing everything for us. Good to talk to you again. Ted Seifried of Zaner Ag Hedge in Chicago. So that's a lot of information there, Tammy.